My name is Diana Reyes. I am 35 years old, and for most of my life the people who share my blood were certain that I was the child who would amount to nothing. My brother-in-law said it plainly, one warm evening in June, at a folding table crowded with relatives, with my daughter sitting close enough to hear every word. He leaned toward me, his voice low and ugly, and he said, "Keep pushing me, Diana, and I will put you in a hospital bed, and little Mia can watch them roll you out to the ambulance." The table went silent. I did not flinch, and I did not beg, and I did not let my eyes fill. I set my paper plate down on the table, I wiped my hands on a napkin, and I turned my chair a few inches so that my body was between that man and my child. Inside my chest, my pulse stayed slow and even, the way it had learned to stay slow in places these people could not picture. What Travis did not know, what none of them around that table knew, was that I had spent 10 years doing work he would never understand, in rooms and valleys he would never see. He did not know that a plain manila folder was already sitting under the seat of my car, and that the folder held enough truth to take apart everything he had built. He did not know that in 3 short weeks, in that very backyard, at my mother's birthday, an old man he had never met would rise from his chair and tell every person present exactly who I was. He thought he was threatening a quiet, divorced woman with a boring job and no one to defend her. He had no idea. To explain how a birthday party became the day my family finally looked at me and saw the truth, I have to take you back to the spring, when my father's ashes were still new, and Travis first smiled at my mother and offered to help her with the money. I grew up in a small brick rancher on Level Green Boulevard in Virginia Beach, in a Filipino family that measured love in food and measured worth in how loudly a person could succeed. My grandfather came to this country in the 1970s as a steward in the United States Navy, and he taught his children that the family name was a thing you carried carefully. My mother, Lourdes, was born in 1960, and she gave my sister and me American names because she wanted us to fit the country she had chosen. My sister, Jocelyn, was 3 years older than me, and she was the one who did everything the way the family wanted. Jocelyn smiled at the right people. She married a big, loud man with a big, loud truck, and she never once made our mother worry. I was the other daughter. I was quiet. I did not explain myself, and when I was 18, I did the one thing no one in the family could brag about at church. I enlisted in the army. My mother told the neighbors I worked in offices, in supply, in paperwork, because that was a version of me she knew how to describe. The truth was more complicated, and I never corrected her, because correcting her would have meant explaining things I did not want to carry into that kitchen. Over 10 years, I deployed 3 times. I trained until my hands knew things my mind could forget, and for the last years of my service, I worked with a small team attached to special operations, doing a job the Army did not advertise and I did not discuss. When I came home for good, I was a single mother with a daughter named Mia, a quiet civilian job at the port, and a habit of watching a room without ever seeming to. To my family, I was simply the sister who got divorced, the one who never remarried, the one who did not own a big house, and so I was the one they stopped asking for opinions. Travis Coleman married my sister the year my father got sick. He was 6'3", he weighed around 240 pounds, and he ran a home remodeling business that always seemed to be one big job away from making him rich. He wore a heavy gold watch, he drove a black Ford truck that he washed more than he paid his crew, and he talked at every dinner, as if the rest of us were lucky to listen. When my father died in the March that everything started, Travis did the thing that made my mother adore him. He took charge. He handled the funeral home. He spoke to the bank. He told my grieving mother that she should not trouble herself with a single number, that family takes care of family, that she could simply sign where he pointed. My mother, who had just lost her husband of 40 years, looked at this big, confident man and felt safe. I remember standing in her kitchen the week after the funeral, watching Travis spread papers across the table, watching him guide my mother's hand to the signature line, and feeling something cold move through me. I did not have proof of anything yet, I only had a soldier's instinct, the quiet itch that tells you a thing is wrong before you can name it. When I asked Travis, gently, what exactly my mother was signing, he laughed and told me it was just paperwork, that I should stick to whatever it was I did at the port, and that the adults would handle the family finances. My mother laughed with him. My sister told me not to make things difficult during a hard time, so I did what I had been trained to do when I could not yet act. I watched, and I remembered, and I began, very quietly, to keep records. If you have ever been the quiet one in a loud family, the person nobody thinks to ask, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and stay close, because this is exactly where the ground under Travis Coleman began to crack. For the rest of that spring, I told myself I was being unfair, that grief makes people suspicious, that Travis was loud but not a thief. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted my mother to be safe in the hands she had chosen. But every time I visited the little house on Level Green, some small thing sat crooked in the corner of my eye. A new invoice on the counter for work I could not see anywhere in the house. A checkbook that used to live in my mother's purse, now living in Travis's truck. A quiet in my mother when I asked how her money was doing, a quiet that had never been there before. I was the daughter who had learned to notice the one detail that did not belong. And in that house, that spring, the details that did not belong were beginning to pile up. The first thing I could actually prove came in May, 2 months after the funeral. My mother mentioned, almost proudly, that Travis had fixed the roof of the rancher, and that it had cost $8,600, and that he had gotten her a wonderful price. I climbed a ladder the next weekend, while my mother made lunch, and I looked at that roof with my own eyes. It was a patch job. A section over the back bedroom had been re-shingled, badly, with cheap 3-tab shingles I could price at the hardware store on Virginia Beach Boulevard. The real cost of that work, materials and a fair day of labor, was somewhere near $4,000, and that was being generous. Travis had charged my grieving mother more than double, and she had thanked him for the discount. I wrote the date down, I photographed the roof, and I kept the receipt my mother did not know she still had. Then it kept going. In June, I learned that Travis had borrowed $12,000 from my mother, a loan he described to her as a bridge for a big contract that was about to pay off. There was no contract. There was a new set of chrome wheels on the black truck, and a fishing trip to the Outer Banks, and a watch even heavier than the last one. The loan was never written down, never repaid, and when I asked my sister about it, Jocelyn told me I was jealous, and that Travis would pay it back when the business turned around. The business was always about to turn around. In July, another piece of him went missing from that house, and this one was not money. My father had kept a 1998 Chevy pickup, a plain white work truck he had babied for 20 years. The one thing of his I had always assumed my mother would keep forever. When I asked where it had gone, she told me that Travis had sold it for her, that it was old junk, that he had gotten her $400 and handled all the paperwork. I found the listing weeks later on a resale site. The truck had sold for $3,200. Travis had handed my mother $400, called the rest a fee for his trouble, and kept the difference. That same week, he had cleared my father's tools out of the garage, a lifetime of good wrenches and a table saw, and those simply vanished. My mother never asked where they went, because by then asking Travis a question was something our family had quietly learned not to do. By late summer, I noticed the thing that frightened me most. My father had left my mother a monthly survivor's benefit of $1,900, money that was supposed to keep her comfortable for the rest of her life. That money was no longer landing in her account. Travis had opened a joint account. He had told her it was safer, and the survivor's money now flowed into a place his hands could reach. Every month, a few days after it arrived, a large withdrawal left that account, and my mother never saw a statement, because Travis had them mailed to a post office box he controlled. By the fall, I could barely reach my own mother without going through him. He had talked her into letting him manage her phone, and somehow my calls began sliding to voicemail, and her replies started sounding like they had been written by someone else. When I drove to the house without warning, his truck was always in the driveway, and he always found a reason to sit in the room while we talked. He was not only taking her money, he was taking her, slowly, the way a hand closes around something small, until it cannot move. That was the part no invoice could ever prove, and the part that frightened me most, because a mother who cannot reach her daughter is a woman with no one left to catch what is being done to her. I know that some of you watching have felt exactly this, that helpless anger of watching a stranger walk into your family and quietly start moving the money around. So tell me honestly, when you first tried to warn the people you loved, did a single one of them believe you? I tried to warn them. That is the part that still aches. In September, I sat my mother down at her own kitchen table, the same table where she had signed papers she never read, and I told her, as gently as I knew how, that I was worried about the money. I did not accuse Travis of a crime. I only asked her to let me look at the accounts with her, together, mother and daughter, so we could both feel calm. My mother's face closed like a door. She told me that Travis had done more for her in 6 months than I had done in years, that he was a real provider, that he did not hide away in silence the way I did. She asked me why I could not just be grateful, and be soft, and be like Jocelyn. Then she said the thing that I carried for a long time afterward. She said, "You spent 10 years running away from this family. You do not get to come home and tell me who to trust." I did not defend myself. I could not tell her that the 10 years she thought I spent running away were the 10 years I spent becoming the one person in the family who could actually protect her. So I closed my mouth, I kissed her forehead, and I went home to my daughter, and I made a decision in the car that night. If they would not let me help them out loud, I would help them quietly, the way I did everything else. That autumn, I became patient in a way that only training makes possible. I did not confront Travis again. I let him relax. I smiled at his jokes at Sunday dinner. I complimented his truck. I asked him easy questions about his big contract. And I watched a proud man grow careless in front of a woman he had decided was harmless. Careless men leave a trail. Travis left me a beautiful one, he bragged, over San Miguel beer in the backyard, about how he had gotten my mother to sign a quitclaim deed in February, a document that had quietly placed half of her paid-off house into his name. He laughed about how easy it had been, how she had signed it between the funeral home papers without ever reading the top of the page. He did not notice the quiet woman at the end of the table, writing a date in her memory. That November, at Thanksgiving, Travis showed me exactly how little this family thought of me, and he did it in front of every person at the table. The food was out, the aunts and uncles were crowded in close, and someone asked me kindly what I had actually done in the army all those years. Before I could open my mouth, Travis answered for me. He laughed and said that I had probably typed reports and folded towels, that not everyone who puts on the uniform actually does anything, and that the real soldiers were the ones who came home with stories to tell. The table chuckled along with him. My own mother smiled down into her plate. My sister leaned over and told me to lighten up when she saw my face. I could have ended it with a single sentence. I could have told that table about 3 deployments, about the team, about the nights I still do not describe to anyone, and I could have watched Travis grow small in his chair. But my daughter was sitting right beside me, 11 years old, watching how her mother answered a grown man's cruelty. So I did the thing I have always done. I passed him the gravy, I said nothing, and I let him believe he had won again. What I did not do was forget. Every laugh at that table dropped into the same quiet place, where I was already keeping the dates and the dollar amounts. I had learned a long time ago that the people who underestimate you the loudest are the ones who never see the ending coming. By the new year, I had built something without anyone knowing. I had photographs of the roof, I had the true price of the materials, I had a written timeline of the $12,000 loan and the wheels and the trip that followed it. I had bank records. I had helped my mother request in a rare afternoon when Travis was out of town. Records that showed the survivor's money leaving her reach month after month. And I had the county record of a quitclaim deed, dated the 9th of February, that put half of the house on Level Green Boulevard into the hands of Travis Coleman. Everything sat in a plain manila folder. I did not know yet how I would use it. Then came the warm evening in June, at the folding table, when Travis found out that the quiet sister had been asking the county questions. It started because a clerk at the county office was an old classmate of Jocelyn, and she mentioned, innocently, that Diana Reyes had been in asking about the deed on the family house. By the time we gathered for the early summer cookout, Travis knew. He drank through the afternoon, he watched me across the yard, and when the plates were full and the relatives were laughing, he set down his beer and came to my end of the table. He asked me, loud enough for everyone, what exactly I thought I was doing, poking around the county like some kind of detective. I told him calmly that I was making sure my mother was protected. That was when he leaned in, and his voice dropped, and he told me that if I kept pushing, he would put me in a hospital bed, and my daughter could watch them wheel me out. Mia was 4 feet away. She heard it, and something in me that had been patient for a year went very, very still. I want to tell you what did not happen next, because it matters. I did not stand up and put that man on the ground in front of my family, though my body knew exactly how, and though a younger version of me might have. I looked at my daughter's face instead. I saw her watching me to learn what a threat is supposed to do to a person, whether it is supposed to make you small, so I did the hardest thing I have ever done in that backyard. I smiled at her, I told her to go get herself a slice of cake, and I let Travis believe he had won. Because I understood something he did not. A man like Travis is never truly beaten in the moment he expects the fight. He is beaten later, in the open, with the truth laid out where everyone he wants to impress can see it. That night, after Mia was asleep, I sat at my own kitchen table, with the manila folder open in front of me, and I stopped being quiet on the inside. The next morning, I did the things I had been trained to do, in order, without emotion. I made an appointment with a lawyer in Norfolk who handled elder financial abuse, and I laid the folder in front of her, and I watched her eyes change as she turned each page. She told me that what my mother had signed could be challenged, that the pattern of withdrawals was documentable, that a quitclaim signed by a grieving widow who did not understand it was not the fortress Travis believed it was. She told me to keep gathering, quietly, and to say nothing. I filed a report with the state agency that protects vulnerable adults, and I gave them the survivor's benefit records, and I let a process begin that Travis could not see. Then I made one phone call that mattered more than all the paperwork. I called Efren Santos. Efren was a retired master sergeant, 30 years in the Army, a man who had known my grandfather from the old Navy days and had watched me from a distance my whole life. Efren was one of the few people in Virginia Beach who actually knew what my 10 years had been, because our worlds had crossed more than once, in places I do not name. I told him what was happening to my mother. I told him about the threat at the cookout, and the folder, and my plan to let the truth come out at my mother's 65th birthday, 3 weeks away, in that same backyard. Then he said, in the flat, calm voice of a man who has ended arguments in worse places than a cookout, that he would be there, and that when the moment came, he would tell my family exactly who had been standing among them all these years. I did not want revenge for its own sake. I want you to understand that. I wanted my mother safe, I wanted her house back, and I wanted my daughter to learn that a quiet woman is not a weak one. But if the truth had to arrive in front of everyone to be believed, then I would let it arrive that way. 3 weeks. I spent them the way I had spent the hardest weeks of my life, patient, prepared, and completely calm. My mother's 65th birthday fell on the 22nd of June, a Saturday, hot and bright, with the whole family crowded into the backyard on Level Green Boulevard. There were trays of pancit and lumpia on the folding tables, a sheet cake from the Filipino bakery on the boulevard, and a cooler of San Miguel that Travis stood beside like it was his throne. He was loud that day, louder than usual, because he had decided the county scare was nothing, and that I had gone back into my quiet corner where I belonged. Efren Santos arrived, a little after 4, in a clean pressed shirt, and he took a folding chair near my mother and waited. Travis barely looked at the old man. He had no idea. The moment came the way these moments do, out of something small. My mother, happy and surrounded by family, stood to thank Travis in front of everyone for taking such good care of her since my father passed. She said she did not know what she would have done without him. And Travis, glowing, could not resist looking down the table at me and saying, so everyone could hear, that at least one person in this family knew how to step up, unlike the daughter who ran off to play soldier and came back with nothing. The yard laughed, softly, the way families laugh at the one they have all agreed to pity. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I walked to the head of the table where my mother sat, and I set the plain manila folder down beside her birthday cake. I said, Mama, before you thank him, I need you to see a few things, and then you can decide who took care of you. Travis told me to sit down. I did not. I opened the folder, and I began to lay the pages out on the table, one at a time, in front of my mother, in front of the whole family. I set down the photograph of the roof. I said, he charged you $8,600 for this. The real cost was under $4,000. Here is the receipt. I set down the record of the loan. I said, he borrowed $12,000 from you and never paid it back. Here are the wheels and the trip he spent it on. I set down the truck listing. I said, he sold Papa's pickup for $3,200 and handed you $400. He took Papa's tools too. You only called it junk because that is what he told you to call it. I set down the bank statements. I said, your survivor's money, $1,900 every month, has been leaving an account he controls. You never saw these because he had them mailed to a box only he can open. The yard had gone silent now. No one was laughing. I set down the last page. I said, and on the 9th of February, while you were still grieving Papa, he had you sign this. It is a quitclaim deed. It put half of this house, your house, into his name. You never read it. He made sure of that. My mother's hands were shaking as she looked from the papers to the man she had trusted. Travis tried to laugh it away. He told the yard that I had faked all of it, that a jealous sister would forge anything, that he had receipts of his own back at the house. But my uncle Rodrigo, my father's older brother, spoke up from the far end of the table, in the low voice of a man who had stayed silent for far too long. He asked Travis to name the contract. He asked him to name the one big job that the $12,000 had supposedly been a bridge for. Travis opened his mouth, and nothing came out, because there had never been a contract, and every person at that table watched him fail to invent one in real time. Travis exploded. He came up out of his chair, his face dark red, and he started around the table toward me, saying that I was a liar, that I had faked all of it, that he was going to shut my mouth for good. 240 pounds of angry man crossed that yard fast. Here is the part my family had waited 35 years to understand. I did not run, and I did not scream. I stepped into him, not away. I turned my hip. I caught the wrist of the hand he had raised, and I used the weight he was throwing at me against him, the way I had done 1,000 times in training, and more than once for real. Travis went down onto the grass beside the birthday table, on his back, his arm bent in a way that told him very clearly not to move. I was not even breathing hard. For a moment, nobody in that backyard moved at all. The children stopped chasing each other across the grass. An aunt let a serving spoon clatter onto a plate. The only sounds left were Travis breathing hard against the ground, and the wind moving through my mother's tomato plants. These were people who had spent 35 years certain that they knew exactly who I was, and in the space of 1 minute, every single one of them had to learn that they had never really known me at all. I looked down at him, and I said quietly, so only the closest could hear, I spent 10 years learning how to do that to men far more dangerous than you. You should have believed me the first time I asked a question. And that was when Efren Santos stood up. The old master sergeant walked to the center of that stunned backyard, and he did not shout, because men like Ephraim never need to. He looked around at my mother, at my sister, at the aunts and uncles who had pitied me for a decade, and he told them the truth. He told them that Diana Reyes had served her country for 10 years. He told them about 3 deployments, and about the team she had been attached to, work he described only as special operations, the kind the army does not put on a poster. He told them that there were men walking around alive today because of decisions this quiet woman had made while other people were trying to kill her, and that the army had pinned medals to her chest that she had never once brought up at a single family dinner. He told them that the quiet woman they had all decided was the family failure had done things overseas that most of the men in that yard could not have survived a single day of. He told them that he had known my grandfather, and that my grandfather would have been prouder of me than of anyone at that table. Then he looked at Travis, still on the grass, and he said that a man who steals from a grieving widow and threatens a soldier in front of her child is the smallest kind of man there is. The backyard was completely silent. My mother was crying. My sister had her hand over her mouth. My mother pushed herself up from her chair on unsteady legs, and she crossed the grass to me, and in front of everyone she took my face in both of her hands, the way she had not done since I was a small girl. She could not find her English. She only said my name, and the word for sorry, over and over, in the language her own mother had given her. And Travis Coleman, who had spent a year being the biggest man in every room, lay on the grass at a birthday party, exposed to every person whose respect he had ever wanted. What came after did not need my hands at all. It came the way consequences come to a man who built his life on the trust of people who finally stopped trusting him. The report I had filed with the state moved forward, and an investigator contacted my mother within the month, and the pattern of withdrawals told its own clear story. The lawyer in Norfolk challenged the quitclaim deed, and because my mother had signed it grieving and uninformed, and because Travis had a documented history of taking her money, the county agreed to void it. The house on Level Green Boulevard went back into my mother's name alone, every square foot of it. Travis was ordered to repay the survivor's money he had drained, and the $12,000 loan he had pretended was a gift, and the padded invoices became part of the case against him. His remodeling business did not survive the story. Virginia Beach is a smaller town than it looks, and word travels through church parking lots and job sites faster than any advertisement. Clients who heard that Travis Coleman had robbed his own mother-in-law stopped answering his calls, and the crew he underpaid found better bosses, and the black truck with the chrome wheels was gone by autumn. My sister Jocelyn stayed with him for a few hard months, and then she did not. The marriage that our family had once held up as the successful one came apart quietly, and Jocelyn moved back near our mother, humbled in a way that eventually made her kinder. She came to me one evening, months later, and she could barely look at me, and she said she was sorry for every time she had told me to be quiet. I told her the truth, which was that I forgave her, and that I understood why a loud, confident man had been easier to believe than a silent sister. My mother's apology was harder for her, because she had said the cruelest thing. She came to my house on a Sunday, she sat at my table for once instead of her own, and she took my hand, and she told me that she had spent 10 years being ashamed of the wrong daughter. She said she finally understood that when I went quiet, I was not running away, I was standing guard. I did not need her to grovel, I only needed her safe, and she was, in a house that was fully hers again, with a monthly check that reached her own hands, and a family that had finally seen the whole picture. Travis moved to another part of the state, where his name meant nothing yet. I did not follow his story. A man like that writes his own ending, one careless day at a time, and it was no longer my job to watch him do it. It has been 2 years since my mother's 65th birthday. The house on Level Green Boulevard is quiet now, in a good way, and on Sundays it smells like my mother's cooking, and my daughter does her homework at the same table where the papers once came out of the folder. Mia is 13 now, and she remembers that day in the backyard, but she does not remember it the way I feared she would. She does not remember her mother being threatened. She remembers her mother standing up. Not long ago, she asked me, quietly, if I had been scared when Travis came across the yard, and I told her the truth. I told her that I was not scared of him, because fear is what happens when you do not know what you can do, and I had always known. I told her that the scary part had come earlier, in the year when I stayed silent, when no one believed me, when I had to trust that patience would win over noise. Here is what I learned in that year, and what I want you to take from this story. Whoever you are, wherever you are watching from, being quiet is not the same as being weak. Sometimes the person in the family who says the least is the one holding the most, waiting for the moment when the truth will actually be heard. Do not let anyone teach you that your worth is measured by how loudly you can announce it. And do not confuse the person who provides the biggest performance with the person who will actually stand between you and harm. Real family is not the one that impresses you across a dinner table. Real family is the one that stands guard when you cannot see the danger yet. I spent a long time letting the people I loved decide who I was, and it nearly cost my mother her home and her security. The day I stopped asking for their permission to protect them was the day everything changed. I did not raise my voice to do it. I simply stopped being ashamed of my own strength. I laid the truth on the table, one page at a time, and I let it speak. My name is Diana Reyes. For most of my life, my family believed I was the one who amounted to nothing. They were wrong. And the quietest person at your table just might be the strongest one you have.